Please welcome to the stage Dr. John B. King, Jr.
Thank you so much. Good morning. I'm very grateful to the EL Education team for extending the invitation for me to speak here today. It's certainly an honor to be here and an honor to follow such amazing students. Can we give the students another round of applause? In many ways, this feels like a full circle moment, seeing many familiar faces from my time in New York as Commissioner of Education. EL Education was instrumental in creating content for New York's Engage New York effort, which has offered educational resources to more than 17 million users since the resources went online in 2011. It's great to see the continuation of the work in such capable hands. And thank you for the wonderful introduction, Emerson and Yana. Between the two of them and Lucas Clamp, the 2018 Principal of the Year, it's clear that greatness is cultivated at River Bluff High School. You know, there are a lot of things that I appreciate about EL Education, but what tops the list is how student-centered the model is. There is no better way to start the day than hearing from young people who are excited to learn and who are doing real work to make both their communities and the world a better place. And that's what I'd like to speak about this morning, connecting our work, whether we are educators or students, to the active pursuit of a more equitable and just society. I'd like to start this morning by sharing something that I was reflecting on as I traveled here to Atlanta today. Recently, I was reading a Time magazine piece remembering the life and legacy of civil rights activist Fannie Lou Hamer, who was famous for her tireless efforts traveling throughout the country registering African Americans to vote in the 1960s. Her birthday was actually just last week. The article recounted a story about Fannie Lou Hamer's characteristic and unapologetic boldness in pursuit of her mission. One day she traveled to Mississippi to a place known then as Indianola's Negro Baptist Church. There she addressed a mass meeting of the faithful, urging them to take action in the civil rights and voting rights movements. She said, "You can pray until you faint, but if you don't get up and try to do something, God is not going to put it in your lap." Now, as that article I was reading points out, the fact that Fannie Lou Hamer would tell a church full of religious people that prayers would only take them and their movement but so far shows her commitment to bold, unapologetic advocacy and activism. And it's the core of Fannie Lou Hamer's message that I really want all of us to reflect on today, that each one of us has a responsibility to work, yes, boldly and unapologetically, toward creating, maintaining, and defending a more just and equitable society. Each one of us has the responsibility to get up and try to do something, and that starts with education. This is a theme that we just saw highlighted in the videos from EL Education schools in Detroit and Silverton through their Better World Day projects. Educators were committed not only to their students' acquisition of knowledge in core academic subjects, as vital as that is, but also to the application of that learning. Educators ensured that their students would make the world better by getting up and doing something with what they learned. We saw students engaged in deep research, fieldwork, interviews, site visits to historic places, and the actual construction of projects that can help to solve real-world problems, like addressing a lack of access to books in neighborhoods in Detroit or ensuring that every community's stories and histories are truthfully represented in a local Colorado museum. This type of rich, engaging, interdisciplinary learning is what every child across the country deserves. And it's the type of learning that EL Education strives to deliver in every school that adopts the EL model. I know the power of a rich, well-rounded education and excellent teachers because I experienced that power myself firsthand as a child. Some of you may know that I grew up in New York City. I went to New York City public schools. Both my parents were career New York City public school educators. And they couldn't have known, although they dedicated, both of them, their lives to New York City public schools, the difference New York City public schools would make in their son's life. And both my parents passed away when I was a kid. My mom passed away when I was 8 in October of 4th grade. My dad passed away when I was 12. And during the period that I lived with my dad, it was just the two of us, and he was very sick with undiagnosed Alzheimer's. So home was this place where I didn't know what my father would be like from one night to the next. Some nights he'd talk to me, some nights he wouldn't, some nights he'd be angry, some nights sad. I can recall one night when he woke me up, 2 in the morning, told me it was time to go to school. I remember being on the staircase in our house, arguing with him about whether or not it was time to go to school. I remember he started pulling me down the stairs. I was holding on to the banister, insisting to him, "Daddy, it's not time to go to school. It's the middle of the night." And I remember I didn't know why he was acting like that, but that's what home was like, night after night, this place that was scary and inconsistent and incredibly lonely. But the thing that saved me, the reason I'm standing here today, is amazing New York City public school teachers who created an environment that was safe, compelling, engaging, interesting, loving. I had a teacher in 4th, 5th, 6th grade, Mr. Osterweil. He looped with us, which is very unusual in New York City public school at the time. Mr. Osterweil's classroom was this amazing place that introduced me to a whole world beyond Canarsie, Brooklyn. We read the New York Times every day in Mr. Osterweil's class. I always say he was doing college and career-ready standards before we called them college and career-ready standards. We did productions of A Midsummer Night's Dream, Shakespeare in elementary school. We did a production of Alice in Wonderland. I was the rose in Alice in Wonderland with big red felt petals sticking out of my head. And I remember the things we did in Mr. Osterweil's class like it was yesterday because his classroom was so impactful. It was the one place where I could be a kid when I couldn't be a kid at home. He was the kind of teacher, like so many in this room, when you finished a book, he was there with the next. When you finished a math problem, he was there with another that was a little more challenging. One of the great honors of my life was when I was sworn in as secretary. Mr. Osterweil was able to be there, and I was able to, in some small way, thank him for the difference that he made in my life. But his classroom saved me. It would have been very easy for him and the other teachers I had growing up to look at me and say, here's an African-American Latino male student, family in crisis. What chance does he have? It would have been very easy for them to give up on me. But they didn't. They saw in me more potential than I could even see in myself. The fact that I'm not in prison or dead today is because of the influence of excellent teachers who provided me with a well-rounded, relevant, engaging education. Teachers in EL schools understand that students thrive with high-quality educational experiences that are tied to high standards and that draw students in as doers, thinkers, creators, producers, and agents of positive change in their communities. Now, the work happening in Rochester, New York, at one of EL's longest-standing network schools, Genesee Community Charter School, is a great example of this. Veteran, that's right. They're trying to do for kids what Mr. Osterweil did for me, trying to create that space that is safe, nurturing, challenging, and engaging. Veteran 6th grade social studies teacher Chris Dolgus has created a wealth of opportunities for students to engage in rigorous academics while contributing to making the surrounding community more just and equitable. A couple of years ago, Mr. Dolgos led the inaugural implementation of his school's Better World project, which explored Rochester's growth and revitalization, as well as the changes and tensions in the community caused by gentrification and the resulting displacement of some of the city's longtime residents. Through writing and art, Mr. Dolgus' students examined important questions, including whose Renaissance is this? Who's telling the story of the Renaissance? Who is benefiting most? Who is being left out of the conversation? And those questions led to self-reflection. What do we value as a community? Who do we value as a community? While working to examine Rochester's identity, the students also did a lot of work to explore their personal identities. Mr. Dolgos brought in the Teaching Tolerance organization via a grant, which allowed his students to collaborate with a local author. Students wrote their own stories about identity and what it meant for them to live in Rochester. Students also had the opportunity to team up with a local artist on a mural project called The Rock Believers to better understand Rochester's neighborhoods. It's inspiring to see the impact that the EL education model had on Mr. Dolgos' students, their learning, and their understanding of critical social justice questions related to changes happening in their very own city. Mr. Dolgos, a 24-year veteran teacher, also explains that the EL education experience pushed him outside of his comfort zone, helping him grow new skills in his approach to instruction. He readily notes that EL education inspired him to look beyond the standards in the social studies curriculum to interrogate pedagogical questions such as how can kids become agents of their own learning, and how can teachers equip students with the right tools as readers, writers, historians, and scientists to effectively make positive change right where they live. Those are the kinds of experiences that EL makes possible and that have long-lasting impacts, not only on students' engagement in their learning, but also in terms of how they show up in society as good citizens who can contribute to their communities. Mr. Dolgos said many of his former sixth graders still remark on how powerful it was for them to work on the Better World Project. I'm sure so many of you in this room have had similar experiences with your students. And all of this comes back to what I asked us to reflect on today. How do we as educators and as students get up and try to do something in the active pursuit of a more just and equitable society? The EL education program helps educators and students do this very thing. What I find particularly powerful about the EL education model is that it combines socio-emotional learning, character building, and rigorous academics with ensuring that students have a strong sense of personal ownership over high-quality work and that they can take action with a purpose through their academic learning. Importantly, the model is also informed by research and evidence of what works. The Better World Project, as a matter of fact, was created because of the strong research-informed connection between students' socio-emotional learning and academic achievement. Studies have shown social and emotional skills help to build cognitive skills. They help students learn academic content and apply their knowledge. In fact, recent research suggests that supporting students' socio-emotional development can make a meaningful, significant difference in students' academic performance and even their test scores. And EL education partner schools widely cite the melding of socio-emotional learning and academics with their students graduating on time and being accepted into college. Many EL high schools have succeeded in ensuring that 95% of their students graduate within 4 years and that 100% of their graduates enroll in college. In Rochester, the research-based Better World Project was so successful that Genesee has continued the model and expanded participation in socio-emotional learning and academic learning across all of their grades. Third graders have been able to research environmental justice issues as they examine deforestation, climate change, and habitat loss happening in the local environment. And this year, Mr. Dolgos' sixth grade class is exploring the creation of a conflict resolution project for their school. To create an even more welcoming, safe, and inclusive school environment, students have discussed implementing a new handbook on how to be a peer mediator, how to resolve conflict peacefully, and how to build in restorative justice and responsive classroom practices into Genesee's school policies. If we are collectively to advance equity and justice through our work, I'd like to suggest that all the educators in the room ask of ourselves the same questions that Mr. Dolgos' students at Genesee Community Charter School asked. Number one, who's telling the story? I've been encouraged to see students leading here at today's conference by sharing their experiences. In just a few moments, in a panel discussion with students will raise their voices and give us advice about what they need in order to be successful. Indeed, in the video we saw earlier, we heard Miss Pamela Hornbuckle, who teaches fifth grade in Detroit, talk about how she saw the student dialogue was key to her students' growth in core academic subjects. When we think about who is telling the story in education, We should always ensure that students are centered. We should also ensure that data is part of the story and informing our work at every step of the way. There's growing research and data that shows, for example, that EL education's literacy partnerships are driving higher student achievement in EL schools. A recent study by Mathematica Policy Research reveals that students in schools with EL literacy partnerships had significantly higher achievement in English language arts. And in Detroit, after just 1 year of literacy partnership, students in all tested grades earned the highest ever scores on Michigan's English language arts assessment. And this is hugely important in a state whose progress has stalled, in a state where Michigan ranks 16th from the bottom in reading performance, and on their current trajectory would be 45th in the country by 2030. Detroit is interrupting that trajectory with the work with EL education. The second question that we should ask ourselves in advancing equity and justice through education is who is benefiting most? As a nation, we know that despite the fact that our children's potential and genius are ubiquitous and universal, the benefits of a high-quality education are not distributed evenly. Students of color and students from low-income backgrounds consistently receive less access to outstanding, well-prepared, well-supported, and diverse educators. Nationally, we know that students of color and students from low-income families too often are assigned to new, uncertified, or less effective teachers than their peers. Students of color and low-income students often get less access to school counselors. We know, for example, that there are 1.6 million students in the United States who attend a school where there is a sworn law enforcement officer and no school counselor. The school-to-prison pipeline in a single data point. Latino students are 40% more likely than white students to attend a school with a sworn law enforcement officer and no school counselor, and black students are 20% more likely. Often, low-income students and students of color get less access to rigorous coursework. Indeed, we know students of color and low-income students are more likely to attend high schools where you can't even take chemistry or physics or Algebra 2, not to mention AP and IB courses. But in our research at the Education Trust, we've also shown that even when the courses are offered in their high schools, low-income students and students of color are underrepresented in those courses. Indeed, there are 500,000 students of color and students from low-income families who would be participating in AP and IB if they were just participating in proportion to their presence in the school. Similarly, we know that nationally, white students are twice as likely to be enrolled in algebra in 8th grade as their black and Latino peers. Too often, we know low-income students and students of color get less access to resources. We did a study called Funding Gaps at the Education Trust and showed that across the country, low-income students were on average getting $1,000 less per pupil than districts serving more affluent students. And all of us know that in many states represented in this room, that gap is even larger, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, even $10,000 differences in spending between school districts. We also showed in that study that the gaps are actually larger based on race. And when you compare districts that have large numbers of students of color, they're getting about $1,800 less per pupil on average than districts that have very few students of color. Third, to boldly and unapologetically work toward advancing equity and social justice through education, we must ask ourselves who's being left out of the conversation. Across the country, despite the fact that a majority of students in our public schools are students of color, only 18% of our teachers are teachers of color, only 2% of our teachers are African American men. Diversifying the education workforce should be a national priority when we know the benefits that teachers of color provide to all students, both students of color and to white students. Certainly we know white students benefit from seeing educators of color as leaders and mentors in their classrooms and schools. I have a friend who says it's a little bit harder to be racist if you learn calculus from a black teacher. Not impossible, but a little bit harder to be racist. A recent report also showed that having just one African American teacher in elementary school reduced the chances that African American students would drop out of high school by 29%. For African American boys from very low income backgrounds, the results were even greater. Their chance of dropping out fell by nearly 40%. As one of my good friends and colleagues likes to say, educators of color are nation builders. But too often, educators of color feel marginalized and silenced. The Education Trust surveyed Black and Latino educators and found that educators of color often feel that they have to tone down their personalities in the schools where they work, and that their voices are not fully heard by school leaders and by many of their white colleagues. EdTrust just released recently a report entitled, "If You Listen, We Will Stay," that explored why educators of color leave the classroom. Some of the top reasons that emerged were because educators felt that they experienced an antagonistic school culture, and they perceived that they were undervalued and deprived of agency and autonomy. We heard from teacher after teacher about an invisible tax experienced by teachers of color. We heard from African American male teachers who experienced the tax of being expected to be the disciplinarian in their schools. We heard from Latina teachers about the tax of being expected to be the translator for families. And it's not that folks don't want to contribute in those ways, but they're often not compensated, not recognized, not given leadership opportunities. And so to the school leaders in the room, I would ask you to think about what more can you do to support your educators of color. And to the teachers in the room, I would ask you to consider the ways that you can support each other so that each of you is respected and valued, so that everyone's voice is heard. And also challenge us all to think about teacher diversity in terms of linguistic diversity as well. We desperately need more bilingual teachers in the United States, and we need to recognize that students speaking a language other than English at home is an asset, not a deficit. We have to invest in our students becoming bilingual and biliterate and wanting themselves to become teachers. We also have to see diversity, equity, and inclusion as the work of institutions, not individuals. Right? I can recall having the experience of being asked when I was a teacher, "Hey, John, it's Black History Month. What are we doing this year?" Right? That we can't put the responsibility for diversity, equity, and inclusion on educators of color alone. Again, it is an institutional responsibility. All of us have to work always towards diversity, equity, and inclusion. Fourth, to advance equity and justice, we have to interrogate, what do we value as a community? To do this, we first have to recognize that what happens inside and outside of school absolutely matters for our students' success. We have to reject the false dichotomy that suggests we have to care about only one or the other. If our students are hungry, if our students are homeless, if our students are dealing with violence in the community, if students are living with family members who are struggling with addiction, all of that contributes to our students' experience of school. I think about a study that was done recently at Johns Hopkins, which you all will find fascinating, a shocking study. They looked at students who couldn't see the board or read the book because of vision issues. And it turns out they did worse in school as a result. Shocking, I know. And then they invested in an intervention. They got students proper vision care. And this is the really shocking part. It turns out if you can see the board and read the book, you do better in school, right? And I make light of this study, not because it wasn't a good study, it was a good and important study, but the sad thing is we aren't doing anything about it. And there are kids today in classrooms all across America who are not getting the academic opportunities they should because they can't see, because they haven't gotten the vision care that they need. We shouldn't see vision care as denying anyone's responsibility to make school as good as possible. At the same time, we have to hold ourselves accountable for addressing kids' needs beyond a great curriculum, as important as that is, beyond great teaching, as crucial as that is. We have to address students' full humanity. We have to see their full humanity. We have to recognize the challenges that stand in the way of their success and let them know that we value them and their high achievement above everything else by providing them with all the supports that they need to reach their potential. And finally, to truly do this equity and justice advancing work, we must ask, who do we value as a community? And it really isn't cheating to say the answer to this question is the same as the previous question. The answer always has to be our students, particularly those who are most vulnerable. And at this moment in our nation's history, that could not be more urgent. When students of color see innocent people of color being unjustly murdered in incidents of police violence, when undocumented students and students from mixed status families sit in class worried about ICE raids and fearing that they'll be separated from their families, when LGBTQ students see a daily assault on their civil rights, and transgender students in particular see a concerted effort in some places to erase their very identity, when students in rural communities see young people who want to stay near family forced to leave in search of economic opportunity, when students live in daily fear of gun violence, from tragic mass shootings like Sandy Hook or Parkland to the grinding daily shootings in cities like Chicago and Baltimore, or when young people worry about the very future of human existence on this planet with the looming impact of climate change, we have a responsibility to stand up for them and with them. We must center their future, their voices, and their leadership. And that truly is the best transition to what we're about to do next, which is to talk with a group of students that you've heard from already about their experience in EL schools. And I will say that EL has been forward-thinking in its models, bridging rigorous curriculum and a focus on socio-emotional learning and academic learning, and social justice, all with the goal of maximizing student outcomes. I have two daughters in public schools in Maryland, one in middle school and one in high school. I'm going to leave quickly after the conference today to get back for my daughter's 16th birthday. And both of them are deeply passionate about building a more just society. They both have participated in marches and protests around gun violence and around climate change. And I think about them and the kind of education I want for them. Yes, I want them to have powerful academic skills. Yes, I want them to be prepared to succeed in college and careers. And yes, I want them to be prepared to be the future leaders of our country and our world. And those goals aren't in competition. What EL demonstrates day after day is that those goals are actually deeply interconnected. If we ask ourselves, what kind of school do we want for our own children? Then that's what we should provide for other people's children. If we ask ourselves, that's right. If we ask ourselves, what kind of school experience do our students need to be the leaders of our community tomorrow? Then that's the kind of education we'll provide, one that brings together building students' academic skills, their readiness for college and careers, and their readiness to be participants in our democracy, to lead the way toward a better future for their communities and for our country. I'm excited to see the great work that all of you will continue to do for educators and for students who, because of their connection to EL, are inspired and better prepared, as Fannie Lou Hamer urged, to get up and try to do something. And with that, I look forward to our conversation with the students. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you.
Let's have another round of applause for Dr. King. Now we're going to have Alejandro, Karely, Jauhnell, and Xaviana, for a brief conversation with Dr. King. Y'all can come on up. Yeah.
All right, can we have another round of applause for these amazing students? So I'm super excited to talk with all of you, and everyone in this room is super excited to hear from you. We got to see you in the videos and got to hear from you a little bit this morning. I'd love for you each to talk about your experiences with the EL curriculum and the projects you've been doing in your schools, and to try to explain for us what you think the positive impact of the projects you've done has been on you. So we'll start with you, Yana, and then we'll go just down the row.
Are you going to ask the question?
What impact have the projects had on you?
The impact that the project has had on me is that, the greatest impact is that I got to help other kids become better readers, writers, and it just feels very good to help other kids and also help myself and be able to do all of this and tell other kids that it's okay to just go out and express yourself and be confident and take that opportunity to do whatever. Like if you have opportunity like this, take it. It is okay. And yes.
I guess the biggest impact for me was discovering things, like how we discovered that Chinese vegetables are perfect for growing in high elevation.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Jauhnell.
So the biggest impact on me, it has made me a better reader and writer because of our Think, Pair, Share project. So basically, it's when our teacher give you a topic, you pair up with your classmates, and basically you share it out to your whole class. So this project has basically helped me become a better reader, writer, and thinker.
What I think,
What impact did the project have on you? What effect did the project have on you?
I had to answer.
Like, what was the best?
Oh,
go ahead.
got it. Sorry. Field work was like the most because whenever we go to like the field work, I mean like reading helps learning, but like going out to field work helps more because like. Because like 2 years ago, whenever we were learning about like Chinese in our town, we went to like the actual like Amachi, and it helped me more than just reading a book and imagining it. And like field work is probably like the puzzle pieces, like getting all the puzzle pieces. And then when we go to the classroom, like all together as a classroom, we like connect all the puzzle pieces, and it's like easy.
Excellent.
Woo!
All right, so let me ask you next to talk about, and Jauhnell, you raised this a little bit, the academic benefits of doing projects. And you can talk about your Better World project, but you can talk about other projects that you've done in school. But some people would say, well, it's great that you're doing projects that make the world better, but how are they helping you as a student? Reading and writing and math. You want to start the other way? We'll start the other way.
Okay, yeah, because I got to think about this.
He asked the question.
Yeah. How doing projects, could be the Better World project, but could be other projects, how do they help you become a better student?
Well, it helped me like read by like because like whenever we read we would read like in the old newspapers from the I can't say this archives. I can't say that. And then we put a lot of notes while we were in field work, so that helps a lot on writing skills. And then it made me really think about like if there's other places where like they hide stuff that has happened around the world.
Yeah, so basically, this project has helped me become better with my classmates. Because really before this, I really wasn't close to my classmates, but being able to work with them and being able to think about how we're gonna make the little libraries and how we're gonna paint them made me and my classmates became closer to each other.
So the project that we did a couple of years ago made me think how we can help the world with water. Like maybe one day we could take water to Africa so they don't have to be hiking every day for water.
Yeah, like Jauhnell said, last year we did get to work with all our classmates. It was very fun to just sit and work with your classmates and work together and think about all the things that you can do and help other people. And it helped me become a better student because, like I said, I became a great reader and even better writer.
All right, so the work that I do is about trying to make the country more fair for everyone, right? Especially for students, and to try to make sure that schools are fair places. What do you see either about schools or about how society is that you think is unfair, that you want all of us as adults to try to change or make better? And we could start with whoever wants to go first. All right, Jauhnell, go for it.
Okay, so some other schools don't have technology, and so Dr. Vidi and Superintendent Dr. Vidi is trying to make that not happen. He wants all kids in the school to be able to have their own technology, just like in Detroit. We have our own technology, and I think that it would be fair that all kids can have their own technology because it's fun.
So I think bullying is like a trouble because like instead of focusing on your work, you focus on what the other person is saying, I guess. And like in our school, like if something like that happens, we do a restorative justice circle, and a lot of schools don't do that, and like, yeah. Okay, so it's a student tells on the other student to teacher, and then we form all together, the three people, the student, the teacher, and the other student to talk about what happened. You have a sheet of paper and you talk about the harm that was done, ways you can fix it, and then at the end you just shake it off and you're friends again.
Okay, so it's not fair. Our schools are not fair because some schools don't have academics, such as art, music, drama, and other academics like that. And now that Superintendent Dr. Vidi is here to help and provide all of that for all schools and students. And like in the past, like I said, most schools didn't have those kind of academics. But now Superintendent Dr. Vidi is here. All schools have those now. They have all those academics now for all the kids and students.
Oh, did you go?
I have to agree with Alex.
Say more. What do you see in either in Silverton or about schools or just in the country that you think is not fair?
Well, kind of like Alex said, like about bullying. Kind of like whenever like they get bullied, they don't focus on school and stuff.
And what should we do about that?
Probably like if there is bullying, like just like Alex said, do a restored circle, so like they don't have to think about that whenever they're doing their class.
All right, so we just have time for one more question. So you have this room of all of these teachers and principals, and so I want you to describe what you think makes school great. Like what if you were describing to someone what makes for a great teacher, what makes a great classroom project, what do you want as a student? Like you're the customer of schools, right? And so we want to know, everyone in this room wants to know, what do the customers think? What do the customers want? Yeah, you ready, Yana?
So STEAM Club is one that we have, and our 5th grade teacher, Miss Perry is not here this year. Miss Perry went to go work at another school. But last year we had a program called STEAM. STEAM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Mathematics. Basically, at the end of the day and after school, and sometimes kids will go with Miss Perry, like at lunch, if they wanted to. And we will work on like things like science and mathematics and stuff like that. It was very fun, and also it helps us be prepared for any challenges that we have to face and be prepared for anything. And that STEAM Club can help a lot, and other schools should have STEAM Club also.
Okay, so I think schools should have homework club. It's always in the mornings or in the afternoons at our school. So like if we have soccer or like cross country or anything like that, we can either go in the morning or have missing homework. But yeah, I think homework club.
Okay. I really think that we need a reading club because reading is my favorite subject. So, so ELA, yeah. So basically, I love ELA because you just let to have your imagination just flow throughout the book. And yeah, we really do need a reading.
Can I put you on the spot for a follow-up question? Do you have a book recommendation? Like, what's the best book you've read recently?
Oh, Percy Jackson.
Oh, nice. Okay, all right, nice. Karely.
I think that students should be sent more to field work, cause kind of like I said earlier, because like it makes you learn more than just sitting and reading in your classroom and watching videos, because you actually get to experience it. And also, if it's like tragic or something, or it's not for kids, I think kids should still learn it, because we can handle it, even like we did.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you guys for a great conversation. Thank you for being brave and sharing your experience in school with all these educators in this room who are excited about your future and committed to your success. So thank you for this conversation. Can everyone please join me in giving a round of applause to our fantastic students?
Thank you.
No, you can leave them.